Start a brand. Build an empire. It's the Private Label Podcast.
All over the world, there's people building 6- and 7-figure brands, and they're doing it in their basements and their spare bedrooms, and that is really exciting.
Knowledge, power, inspiration.
I just love the show. It's the right information in the right format. It's perfect.
What we're doing here is not just building a business, we're building a brand. And if you do it really well, you are building an empire.
The guests are top notch. It's my favorite podcast by far. I don't miss an episode.
You see, I'm not the expert, but I can bring the experts to you each and every week on the show.
Now, here's your host with another game-changing guest, Kevin Reiser.
Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the show. I am your host, Kevin Reiser, and I'm so honored that you have chosen to join us today. Hey, a couple of real quick housekeeping notes before we dive into today's interview. First, if you are new to the Private Label Podcast, I want to invite you to visit the Start Here section of our website, privatelabelpodcast.com. Lots of good stuff waiting for you there, so don't miss that. And secondly, already several dozen of you have joined me, have made the decision to join me on my wholesale journey. We're calling it the $3 million Wholesale Challenge. That's my goal this year. It's actually to match our private label revenue with $3 million in wholesale revenue in the year 2017. I'm partnering with my friends Dan and Eric and putting together and making available to you some exclusive training on how to sell wholesale. You can find out more about that just a few days to go before that registration closes at privatelabelpodcast.com/wholesale. If you're interested in diversifying your business, don't miss it. privatelabelpodcast.com/wholesale. All right, so what makes a brand different than a business? Why do some brands really crush it and just create movements and empires, if you will, and really connect with large amounts of people and create experiences that those people want to talk about over and over and share with everyone that they come into contact with, while other brands and businesses flounder? Well, it's all about the process that is used to create that brand. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Here in the coming weeks, you're going to see a brand new brand and some changes that we are making here at the podcast. It's really exciting stuff. We've been working on it for more than 6 months now, and the process has been so enlightening, so eye-opening to me that I want to introduce you to really the man behind that process. He is Jared Angaza, and he is a world-renowned philanthropist and strategist. Jared has traveled the globe and worked with some of the most well-known nonprofits and governments and brands like Starbucks out there, and his work is incredible. You're really going to enjoy getting to know Jared and hearing and learning from him. So please welcome our very special guest to the show, Jared Angaza. Jared, welcome to the Private Label Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Well, I'm really excited to have you. I've been excited about this interview for quite some time because you and I have been working together along with our whole creative team for the past couple of months. And our audience is in for a real treat because here in just a few short weeks, they're going to experience really the fruits of our labor and more than the fruits of my labor, the fruits of your labor. And that is with the brand refresh and kind of some tweaks and some changes coming here to the show and to all of the exciting things that we're doing. And it's just been a remarkable process. So I wanted to have you on, talk a little bit about branding, a little bit about your story, because it is a remarkable one and one that I think our audience will love hearing about and be able to take some applicable lessons from as they look at their own business, their own brand, and all of those types of things. So before we dive in, tell us a little bit about yourself, my man.
Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction, first of all. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and I'm stoked to be on your show. I've had a bit of an unorthodox lifestyle. I'll give you that. I've been all over the world. been an activist and philanthropist most of my life since I was a kid. And I think that the studying of the way people act, their behaviors, what drives people, what their fears are and motivations and things like that. Obviously, as an activist, I kind of had to dive deep into that. And as I did that, and throughout life, as I went overseas, I lived in Africa for 10 years, in East Africa, and worked on tons of different projects there, USAID projects and government projects and private entity projects. And in that activism, in that philanthropic endeavor, all those things, I learned about human behavior. I learned about what makes people tick. I learned about, it's not a perfect science, obviously, but you can find some rhythms there, and you can find kind of like, what causes people to change their behavior, what causes people to buy something or not buy something, and so on. And as I learned more of that, and then also, as a starving activist, I had to figure out how to put food on my table. I was like, well, I better turn this into something. Right. And, I thought, well, rather than just going and getting a job doing something else, I come from an entrepreneurial family. I thought, well, how can I take this and turn it into something that, that I could monetize without killing the soul of it all, Sure. And I thought about, what kind of, I think it's Alan Watts says, intelligent people find something they love to do and organize a way to make money from it. And I like that.
I love that too. So the activism came first. There were things that you were passionate about, things in the world that you felt you could influence and change. And that came first. And then later on, you found that some of the strategies, the tricks, the methods to your madness, if you will, really could be applied to business. Is that a good way of saying it?
Yeah. I mean, it sort of stemmed out of two different directions, I guess. One was that I recognized a synergy there that was interesting to me, because I was, in being an activist and realizing the impact of certain types of capitalism around the world that tend to be exploitative of people and the land and things like that. And on those issues I was working on, I also realized, there's a yin and yang to everything. There's a good way to do this too. And perhaps I could tap into being a part of more of businesses that were operating with better ethics, that were in more harmony with the earth, and so on and so on. And maybe I could take this skill that I had, or, some skills that I've gained along the way of understanding how to kind of get to the root of things and extract the essence of a problem. Usually that was related to civil society or some injustice or something like that. But I realized at the same time, if you have a business, theoretically, you have that business to solve someone else's problem. Even if it's, I need a burrito, right. I got a solution to that. But either way, you're kind of problem solving, and well, that's an area of business I could get into, and and it was right at the kind of the beginning of the discussions. This was at that point maybe 15 years ago. Of the kind of the social enterprise movement. So I tapped into the front end of that, and I'm still continuing to do a lot of that. However, now, I work with all kinds of brands all over the world that don't necessarily frame themselves as a social enterprise, but they're doing great business with great ethics, taking care of great teams, and they really care a lot. And I think a very integral element of a brand is that you have to care a lot. It's a lot of intentional activity, and you don't get intentional unless you really care.
Right. So have you had brands that you had to turn down work? I mean, have you had companies that maybe you didn't feel like they had, the right stuff, and so you've had to say no?
Absolutely. Many. Yeah. It's not a rare occasion on that one. And some of them are just purely come down to I didn't align with them from an ethics standpoint and how they're doing business. Yeah. And I've had stuff where I was in the midst of a major, $40,000, $50,000 brand rebrand or something like that, and come back around and, just getting into the front end of it. And I said, I can't do this. It goes against some of my principles. And I gave the money back, and they were flabbergasted. Like, what do you mean? Money talks here, pal. And I'm like, well, you're talking to the wrong guy. But I understand that, yes, and I have to run a business, and I've run quite a few of them, and had a creative agency in Nairobi for about 3 years that continues to operate very well and works with some of the top brands in that region. And, when I was with them too, we had people come across all the time that it wasn't a good alignment. So I either didn't take it or backed out when I thought I needed to and gave the money back and tried to keep integrity on my part. But yes, right. I can turn them down for sure.
You have had just a remarkable career, Jared, and have worked with so many amazing organizations and governments. We could fill up an entire show just talking about some of those stories, but I'm wondering if you have one story that just sticks out. Maybe it's a success that you had, or some massive change you were able to play a role in affecting, that just from those last 15 years or so of all the work that you've done that really sticks out in your mind as a favorite.
Yeah, there's two that come to mind real quick, and I'll hit them real quick.
Perfect.
One was right about the time I met my wife, actually, because I hired her to come work for me as a country director in Rwanda, oddly. And then, now we've got a wonderful family. Got more than I bargained for there. That was a great business investment. So when we first came together, I asked her to come help me because suffice it to say, we were aligned in terms of work that we were doing, and it was a pretty easy crossover for her. But I was starting an ethical fashion label. I'd been working in Rwanda for maybe 3 years at the time. I was there for another couple of years after that. I was helping women to get out of prostitution, trafficking, and that kind of underworld of things, and realizing that, yes, I can get them out of that. I can work with Rwanda to create new policies and do that kind of stuff. And I was working on that as well. But they have to have money to put food on the table, obviously. So then what are they going to do? So I thought, well, I can create a business and work the numbers and get money coming in here and so on and so on. But it's not, I typically look at something and say, okay, then how can we go further than that? How can we go a little bit deeper? And I realized that, well, a lot of what was causing them to be in this kind of environment, a lot of what was creating the environment that they were in, that sort of perpetuated this thing that I was trying to affect of women being pushed into prostitution. I thought, well, what if there's a story problem here? And the story problem is that here in this country, when I say Rwanda, you know what you think of.
Right.
Genocide.
Sure.
That's their story. That's their brand, fortunately. And I was there, 14 years after the genocide. It's been, it's not like 24 years after. But I realized that there was the potential to change that story, to affect a change in that story, not single-handedly, but I could contribute to something, that was maybe telling a more positive story. And I thought, what would that positive story do for those women? I love that quote by John Steinbeck. It's the nature of man to rise to greatness if greatness is expected of him. If is probably the most important word in that sentence. And I think, there's an expectation because of a story here. And it was about the country, and it was about the situation that these women were in. And I won't get into the gruesome details, but there was a story that kind of pushed them into that direction.
Right.
And I thought, what if these women have been stripped not only of, finances and career and sort of social status and all that, but to kind of sum it up, it was dignity. They had no path to dignity. I can't give them dignity. I can't donate it to them, but I could give them a path maybe. So in all of that, I realized the importance of story. Now, this was 7 years ago or something, and I've been doing branding stuff for longer than that. But actually, sorry, it was 9 years ago. But I realized then kind of another level of the importance of story. And that was really what changed my branding technique. And that's kind of where what I call, brand alchemy now. We can talk about that later, but that's where that came from. It was from that moment of saying, we need to tell a different story. So we did. We created high-end fashion products out of a local paper kind of bead rolling scenario. And I brought in students from Rhode Island School of Design, top fashion school in the United States. And we took interns overseas, which is quite a feat, I might add.
Yeah.
And we went there and created these amazing, regal, bombastic kind of looking pieces, these huge runway pieces. And then I put them on the runway in the States and in New York and Nashville, where I'm from, and so on. We did big, beautiful fashion shows, and we got jewelry on Donna Summer, and it was nice enough to adorn them. And and also was a big support to us financially. And so there's all these things that came together, and I thought, man, the feeling that these women got from seeing their products on the red carpet and on famous disco singers and so on.
Sure.
It was amazing. So I realized the power of story, the power of kind of even getting to the root of something and realize it was dignity that these women really wanted to experience. That was what would bring them joy and so on. So that was a big, big shift in everything that I was doing.
That's huge. And it's so much more than a handout at that point.
Yes. Yeah. And I was, I again, being kind of a studier of things kind of from a scientific level, I'm a bit of a science nerd. I really appreciate that method. And I was used to kind of looking at the root of things. And I thought, man, there's something else going on here that we can do beyond just creating some income. So that was an interesting pivot for me. And it made a big, big impact in my life that's still, rippling out today. And then awesome. Another, just a really brief one, is that I had an opportunity to speak to, through a human rights organization that I'll not name for the moment, but it was kind of a secret scenario where we brought some activists into Nairobi from Sudan, the top activists in the country. And they were having such difficulty in making an impact in some of the things that were happening in the government and so on and so on. So I got coupled with this group of activists, 18 activists. And these were high level, risking their life people, the best of the best. And I got the opportunity to do a 4-day workshop with them to teach them how to create more effective campaigns, how to really change behavior or influence a change in behavior in society, but also helping them to realize that it wasn't really society they needed to change for some of the things they wanted to do. They needed to influence some of the MPs, members of parliament. And I said, well, we got to get in their head. What do they want? We got to align with that. And we went through this process. And since then, I've started doing a lot more campaigns because I realized the science of campaigns, more than just your general marketing, but to have a specific goal with a specific timeline and so on. I really like campaigns. And now, in the branding world, I do more campaigns than just marketing. And I really like that kind of, because there is a formula there and there's kind of a rhythm to it. Sure. And some measurements and matrix and things like that. So yeah, I think that, again, it's the power of story and the power of really getting into people's minds. And I think that's what branding is all about. Maybe this is a good segue into some of that discussion.
Absolutely. And I want our audience to leave this interview, Jared, with a little sense of that. Obviously, there is a lifetime and a wealth of knowledge inside of your head. For most of us listening to this today, branding is much more of a foreign object. It's something we're not as intimately familiar with. For a lot of our audience, they're just starting a business, or maybe they have a brand, or maybe a lot of people hearing this think they have a brand, think they have a story, and they're going to rethink that after listening to us today. So I want to ask you what is going to seem like some really elementary, really rudimentary type of questions, but I think they're applicable here. What is branding?
Oh, wow. Well, I will give you my opinion on that. There are lots of opinions out there as to what branding is. And I think anybody that's really heavy into branding and in terms of that being their vocation, their craft. And maybe that's the differentiating aspect. If it is their craft, if branding is someone's craft, something that they put that much love into, I think everyone would realize that they all have their own kind of formula.
Right.
But there's some general principles there that I think most people would agree with. I look, I call my brand of branding brand alchemy. And the reason I use the word alchemy is, alchemy is that idea of taking something, a bunch of kind of seemingly basic elements, and taking those, having a conversation, understanding kind of what it is that you're wanting to create out of that, and then sort of bringing in some of these other formulas or some of these other elements that I'll speak to here in a second, and creating something that is greater than the sum of its parts, something that you look at it and you think, like, how did you get from here to there? You had all these basic things, and now you've got this extraordinary brand experience on the other side. that, I wanted to create that kind of magical experience, because I think it is beautiful and a bit magical when you go through that experience. I mean, you and I have been doing this with your brand, and I think it's been beautiful. I get excited about it, and I go in and talk to my wife about it afterwards and say, "Oh, we just had this really great meeting." That's magic. That's how it should be.
So if you do it well, it almost seems like it almost creates a question in your mind of how did this become so big or so awesome or so in depth, right? As opposed to, I'll be honest, I'll kind of bear it all here. I mean, and I've had some experience with branding and definitely have seen people that have done it well and others that haven't done it as well. But when I think of branding prior to the experience we've had with you and this journey, it's all about the physical things, right? It's the logo, it's the slogan, it's the name, it's the tagline, but it's really so much deeper than that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you and I were talking a little bit about, the discussion about how do people screw it up? How do they not do the branding walk correctly? And I think that it really comes down to sort of the perception that you just talked about, that perspective that it's just kind of these physical elements, it's your logo or whatever. When I was, working in some of the developing countries, when somebody said I do branding, I knew what they meant is that they would take my logo and put it on a coffee mug if I wanted, or a pen, or whatever. So that, and that is the application of a brand. Yes, but we need to create the brand. And I think that when people, so that's a perspective I think that people have, and that's a little off, obviously. But I think that even when you go into the deliberate process of creating a brand, probably the area where most people go off the rails is when they fail to understand the importance of tapping into the human spirit, into the human behavior, how people, again, it's, and I think maybe to describe, a better way of describing maybe how people screw it up is to describe maybe how I think it should be done, because it's the absence of those things that,
So you've seen a lot of brands that do things well, and others that don't do things as well. Let's talk about some brands that do things really well. Give us some reference points for that.
Well, I mean, I think an easy one that people can relate to is, kind of the Starbucks experience. Starbucks, I was in the coffee industry in East Africa. I know coffee. Starbucks coffee is not my favorite coffee, suffice it to say. So I'm not going there for the coffee. I could go to some other mom and pop shop down the street and probably get a better cup of Joe.
Sure.
But a lot of times, because I'm a business person and I have a lot of things going on and I got a gaggle of kids and all that, I'm pretty deliberate about my time. So, and we travel a lot. So I'm going into a new city. I want to go to the Starbucks because I know what I'm going to get.
Right.
I know what I'm going to experience. I know that I'm going to go in there. I'm going to feel a bit of an energy. And this goes into the brand experience. So why is Starbucks so great as a brand? Starbucks is great because they have and I'm talking specifically about the coffee shops. The coffee shop has created an environment of creativity, of movement, of community, all these things. People, like, I go there and you feel kind of that energy of like, wow, maybe I should be creating a business while I'm here. And I just came for a cup of coffee. And I love that. So there's an experience there that has to do with the geographic space. And that's special when you can do that.
And they can create that or recreate that in virtually any city. I mean, I've been in Starbucks in really small towns in Nebraska and in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. And yeah, there's some nuanced differences, but in large part, that energy, that experience you talk about remains.
Absolutely. And that speaks to another level of branding that, and this is a good one because it's an area where they often get it wrong. Like you were asking about before. It's failing to understand, like, you can create the world's greatest brand, okay, in terms of experience. Let's just say you've created a great experience. It looks amazing. It sounds amazing. It creates it taps into emotions and all that. But if there aren't systems in place from an operations standpoint, this is where branding and operations kind of blend together. If those operating systems aren't in place to ensure a consistent experience, the wheels fall off real quick.
Right.
It's not going to last. You have to have the systems in place. People want to know that they're going to get a similar, at least, experience every time they have the experience. So that's important as well. But I guess with Starbucks, yeah, I mean, they've done a great job of creating an experience that is consistent.
Let's talk about the benefits of a brand done right, Jared. A lot of people listening to us right now have physical products businesses. Some of them view those businesses as brands. Others are just purely, using them as a business or a cash flow opportunity. But there's certainly a lot of emphasis on brand creation and building something that's sustainable and scalable and maybe sellable down the line. What would be your argument for actually taking the time to create a brand right and having all of the different elements that go into that, as opposed to just slapping a logo on a product and selling it?
Well, I think it comes down to, just to simplify it. I think that's important in this kind of process. To simplify the question of, what do I need to do with the brand? How do I need to be that deliberate about the brand experience if I'm creating widgets and, slapping a label on them and putting them out? Or if you want to do more than that, and you really want to create something more remarkable, you have to then ask yourself, okay, what am I going to do about marketing? Now, marketing, and just to be clear, I look at the branding, as developing the experience that you're going to consistently deliver to your audience. And it is a target audience. And that's a point we'll talk about too. You know how important that is.
Yes.
Then, if you're going to do that, you have to say, okay, I have an objective here and I'm going to have to market it. So you say, okay, I'm going to create this brand that is catered to a specific audience that I understand kind of how they work, and then I'm going to have to promote it. So I look at marketing as saying, okay, now this is the promotion side of the brand that I just worked really hard to create. So branding is the experience, and marketing is the promotion of that experience. And really, part of your brand is how you deliver that experience. That's where marketing and branding kind of blend a little bit. And the relationship marketing is what I talk about most, because that's honoring the brand you just created. You can't build this remarkable human spirit touching brand and then do some kind of cheap sales tricks on the other side. You'll lose your audience.
Much harder to do the marketing unless you've done the heavy lifting of the brand building and the essence of that and finding your voice and all of those things. What about some tangible benefits, though? I mean, I would suspect that companies that have done a good job of creating a brand and are more in touch with their customer base experience, higher profits and higher return rates of customers and higher customer satisfaction rates and all of those things. Wouldn't that be true? Absolutely.
So here's a good question with that. And knowing your brand, I know that this would resonate with you. I would argue with most, or ask most people with a decent brand, if I ask them, what is your most effective, way of marketing to people? What's your most effective method for marketing to people in terms of creating a loyal audience and creating, I think a big question with marketing is you have to ask yourself, is marketing my brand really difficult? If it is, you might want to look at your brand.
Wow.
You might want to look at the experience that you're delivering, because marketing shouldn't be that difficult. And I think that marketing gets a lot easier when you've been very deliberate about creating your brand and that experience that you're delivering consistently. And then, I find it rare that anyone ever says that there's a better marketing action for them than word of mouth. And right. People going out and saying, "Oh my God, have you tried this brand? It's amazing. Have you gone? Have you listened to Private Label Podcast? It's amazing."
Sure.
That kind of thing. And that's why we're as podcasters, we push our reviews and ratings and things on iTunes and whatever, because it means something.
Sure.
And And when other people go on there and they see that, they say, wow, you think about most websites and looking at kind of the rhythms of websites and what people pay attention to and so on. A testimonials page is always going to be real high on the list.
Right.
They're always going to say, okay, who are these people on the about page and what are other people saying about them? So my thing is to say, let's create a brand that, yes, that taps into that human spirit. And then let's figure out how to create experiences that cause people to go out and be evangelists for your brand. Because those brand evangelists are going to be so much more effective at selling you than 50 Facebook ads or anything else. Ultimately, people want to know what other people think about you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about brand alchemy, which is the unique and proprietary kind of formula or the special sauce, if you will, that you have created to help people really create that type of experience with their brands. And it's made up of different components. Walk us through those and tell us a little bit about them.
All right. Well, I think we have to kind of look at let's look at the basic elements of branding. We're talking already about experience, about connection, about obviously then creating the systems that afford you the ability to deliver a consistent experience, and relationship. And I think that's where the marketing part comes in, is the relationship side of things. That's where it kind of blends the two. To create a great brand, you have to look at people's perspective. And this is where it taps into what I was discussing about before that got me into this industry in the first place, is the understanding of how humans work, and looking at what do we need to know about a human if we want to sell a product to them, or if we want them to change their behavior in some way. I need to know, what are their biggest fears? What are they up about at night? What do they stress about? And then on the other side, what are they most motivated by? What are they most excited about? What do they want most? What do they love? And then to look at their lifestyles and say, what is their behavior like? Where do they go? What do they care about? What's interesting to them? That was something that I learned again in the philanthropic activism world. I was like, you guys are creating these events, about gender-based violence or something like that, and then you have it at an auditorium with a bunch of people that come there that are interested in that. But why not talk to the people, the perpetrators, the guys that are causing that problem?
Yeah.
And they're not going to come to your event. And if they do, they're already sold. You don't need to talk to them. So let's come to people where they're at. And in that case, it was, let's go to boxing matches and soccer tournaments and things like that, and engage with them, in a way that they understand. Same thing if you're trying to sell a candy bar, or a protein drink, or a podcast. It doesn't matter. We need to come to people where they are at. We need to understand their behaviors. And we need to tap into that rather than trying to redirect that. You're already trying to sell them a product. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. Don't try to redirect their behavior at the same time. So let's say, I think one of those, or perspective is at the root. We have to understand people's perspective. What kind of a worldview do they have? And then we move into what you talked about earlier. You and I were talking about before the call, I think, unearthing the essence. And in that, I think there's always something in there, and somebody that maybe because they were so fervently working towards creating this business of this idea that they had or whatever, they kind of maybe forgot to tap into that.
Right. They missed that.
Something special inside them, or the reason why. And then we've got to get into the imagination side of things. We got to tap into imagination. And it was, I think, being a creative, I've always been in a creative director position, or I was in the music industry in Nashville, I was in Hollywood and film and all kinds of stuff. I love the imagination side of things. Suffice it to say, without going down that trail, we have to imagine what this could be, what this experience could be. And I think people sometimes just get too practical. They forget to tap into the imaginative side of things and to reimagine what could be with this brand. And that the first step with us was to look at who is your audience, to understand what we just talked about. What are their fears and motivations and behaviors and things like that? What are they motivated by? And then we go into the vision. And it comes back to what we talked about before. What do you want people to experience? How do you want to connect with people? How do you want to foster relationships? what's the impact that you're trying to make? It doesn't have to be some social, benevolent kind of impact. It's just you start a business for a reason. In your case, you wanted people to know, you wanted people to feel empowered and equipped to go out there and create a remarkable private label brand. So there's a vision there. And I think that these are some of the elements. When I talk about brand alchemy, it's this sort of amalgamation of creativity and economics and science and strategy and human behavior and psychology, all those things kind of put into one. And then from that, we sort of, to use a alchemic word, transmute things into, this ethos and vision and all the extraordinary experience and stuff that you want to create for someone. And that's what fosters the brand loyalty, the relationships, and that harmony that we're looking for with your audience, where they go out and they become your best marketing tool.
Yeah, and it makes that word of mouth that we all crave, that we all want, and that is the best form of marketing, as you said, Jared. It makes it so much easier for them to connect with you and to share that experience so passionately with other people. It is a more in-depth process. It's the most in-depth process I've ever gone through with regards to a brand or marketing strategy or anything like that. But I definitely am a believer now. Let's talk about some of the outcome of that. Going through that brand alchemy process helps you to start to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And you mentioned a few of those just now. Run through the list for us, though, Jared, with regard to ethos and the voice and all of the things that we've been creating for our brand.
Well, I think there's a lot that goes into it, obviously. But when we go through, for instance, when you and I started, the first thing was target. Who are you targeting with this? Who did you create this for? Who is this going to? And I often tell people too, like, don't just tell me about who you might be selling to now, but who stands to benefit most from what you're doing? Let's talk about them. In theory, they would be the most likely to purchase your product or service anyway. So let's start there and realize that this, should be catered to them. So we go through that process and then through the vision, like I talked about before. And as you know, we start to look at the tone and personality of things. What is the personality of the experience that we're going to create?
Right.
And how does it feel? What are the descriptors in that? The adjectives and the emotions and that you want to evoke, and so on. Then we get into your core values, which we had fun with your brand, and kind of looking at that and creating some poetry out of that, and saying, how do we make this fun? These are the principles that keep us on the rails. Especially when times are difficult. That's why you take the time to write down your core values to remind yourself. And some of these other elements, and we get into the essence of things, how we boil that down into just a couple of words and so on, because the process of that is so important. As you know, once we get those two little words, we don't even use those two little words again, other than to kind of remind ourselves of what it is, what is the most simple version of this brand, of everything that I want this to be. And that's important, again, from a process standpoint. And then we come out with a brand mantra. And that brand mantra is so important with marketing, because yes, it is kind of it becomes the essence kind of statement for your brand.
Right.
It's two little sentences, your elevator speech, your 30-second pitch, whatever it is that you want to call it. I call it a mantra because I'm a hippie. But there's your brand mantra that you say over and over, like you do a mantra, is it's a tool. And it's not just a tool for you. Yes, you can have it. It makes your conversations efficient and effective, and you feel more confident because you've got this great tool there. And you know how it is when your car breaks down and you're like, I don't have any tools. But if you have the right tools or the right mechanic with you or whatever, then you feel confident in the situation. That's important,
right,
for you and your team and so on. But it's also important to arm your audience. If you want them to go out and be brand ambassadors for them, do you want them to say 50,000 different things about who you are? Or do you want them all kind of chanting the same mantra? Because that's what starts to create brand recognition like nothing else. And it spreads. That's viral marketing. But you have to equip them with the right tools. So when we create a website, which you and I are in the midst of now, we go through that process of saying, what's the story? And then what are the tools, these little tools, and you don't label them tools, but what are the little tools that you're going to put here that you know people are going to pick up on, like your brand mantra, and they're going to cut and paste it and send it to somebody in an email, or they're going to tell it to them over the phone or some other chat session or whatever. But you give them these tools so that they can go out and work for you and bring people back to you in a consistent way so that their amplification of your brand is just as consistent as the deliberate effort you're putting forth in your brand experience.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing. It really is. And that's a great way of explaining it. Jared, so many of the people listening to us right now, I mean, everyone's in a different place. But if you're listening to this episode, the thing I want you to take away is this, and that is, you know, when we come out of however long this period of private label growth is, and there's a lot of speculation that the good days are over and, you know, it's all downhill from here. I'm not one of those people. But at some point, this kind of crazy fad or phase of just tens of thousands of people starting private label products and selling them on Amazon, it's going to wind down. It's going to start to slow down. And the ones that survive that, I truly believe, are the ones that focus on building not just a business and not just selling a product, but creating a brand. Some of you have started that process and you're going through this experience or have gone through it. Maybe some of you hadn't thought that you wanted to up until this point, but you're thinking you might want to now. So Jared, I want to have you talk to those people for just a couple of minutes. What's some advice you could give them? Where do you go? Where do you start? If I've got a widget right now and I'm selling it online, but it's just, you know, XYZ widget, and I've never really thought beyond that, how do I start this process? It seems so daunting.
Well, I think part of the first stretch there is to tap into why you think it's important. You know, why is this? And there are plenty of ideas out there, and I'm a note taker. I don't want to miss anything, so I write ideas down all the time. And then at the end of the week, usually almost every week, I'll look back through some of my ideas, and about 75% of them, I think, what was I thinking? Why did I even write that down? That was a terrible idea. But there may be 25% of them in there, or one, or whatever, out of that I go, now that might have legs. You know, sometimes these days with all the ideas I got going, and sometimes I'll give that to someone that's already kind of in that arena and say, what do you think of that? If you like it, go with it. But when you have these ideas, you have an idea about something, a widget of some kind, whatever it is, and you say, okay, I want to do the private label thing. I would encourage people to take that and say, okay, I'm going to walk through this process for a week or two. If it's something that you really want to do, walk through it, do the research. Look at who else is out there doing it. Look at your competition. The competitive analysis is very important. As you know, you and I went through that in the beginning too.
Right.
I want to see, you know, what are we up against here? It doesn't mean you're always measuring yourself to them or that you have to do what they do or in better or whatever. That's not always it. It's just be cognizant of what's around you and understand kind of what's going on in the space that you're wanting to affect, where people are already gathering and buying those products, services, whatever. So I think it's important to look at that idea, look at the competition, other people that are doing it. Is there anything there that you want to emulate? Is there anything there that you want to, you know, run away from? Are there things, methodologies there that you see working and so on? So then you move to the next step and say, okay, maybe I've got that. I've got a handle on that. And I understand that, you know, there's some things that are going on here and good in this space that I want to emulate, some things I don't like. And it seems like there's space for something a little bit different here, and that's where I want to be. You know, you have to figure out what is it that's different about you. What's your? We hear USP all the time. Your unique selling proposition. That's important. You know, as cliche as it is important. What is unique about you? Maybe it has something to do with your story. Maybe it has something to do with your particular ability and aesthetics, and when it comes to branding, and you create just the exact same product as someone else, but it looks better, and mind you, it has to look better to your particular audience. So it may not look better to everyone, but as long as it looks great to your target audience, then that's what you need. So there's the little things that may be unique about you, and again, it doesn't have to be grandiose, but just something that starts to be an element in your story, and explore that. And then once you've kind of gone through that process, you have to think, okay, who are the people that are buying this on a regular basis, buying products like this on a regular basis or service like this on a regular basis? What do they care about? What are their fears? All the things that we talked about before. If you can get into that psyche and start to understand your audience, the people, the humans, remember, you're selling to humans, right. Tap into their spirit.
Yeah, that's so important. And that's something that I think we lose sight of a lot of times, right? I mean, we as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we see what we do as a transaction and an exchange of money for goods or money for services, but we forget the fact that there's human beings behind each one of those transactions.
Yeah, people say I've got to be selling, the old ABC, always be closing. I'm selling. And I'm like, yes, to whom? To people, to actual people. And they're people that are discerning, like you. They're going to be choosy about their brands because there's a lot of stuff out there. We have more access to more things than ever before. So we have to be unique. We have to be not only unique, we have to be skilled at articulating that, the nuances. When I talked to you in the beginning, remember I talked about nuances. Branding's about nuances. It's these little details that people leave out. And I think that's another area that is kind of in the fail box where people, they don't pay attention to the little things, the nuances. And I have one of my gurus, Rob Bell, says how you do anything is how you do everything. Wow. And that, not only is that a great life advice, just about how you live your life, it's great brand advice. Because I look at someone's brand and I think, well, if they're dropping the ball in this area, or if they have 85 spelling errors on their website, right, or whatever, why on earth would I trust them with my brand? Or why would I trust them enough to buy their food product or something like that? How they're doing their brand is probably how they're going to treat me. It's a representation of how they're going to treat me. So again, I think that quote right there, that how you do anything is how you do everything, that's a good thing to take into the brand discussion, a good element to take in the very beginning.
Absolutely. Well, if I may say so, Jared, how you have done things as it relates to our process has just been remarkable. There's a few people, a handful, that I really consider having had a tremendous impact on the journey of the show this far and everything that we've done over the last 2.5 years or so. And you are right up there amongst the top, my friend. It has been a real pleasure. I could just go on talking for days. I hope you'll come back soon. The website is jaredangaza.com. Check out the podcast, which is really an interesting podcast. If you're interested in more in branding and really philanthropy and just all of the things that Jared is passionate about, Inipi Radio. We'll have links to all of that from the show notes section of the page. Jared, thanks so much, my friend.
Thank you so much. It was an honor. And the whole process with you has been excellent. I'm very appreciative.
All right. So what did you think of my conversation with Jared? I tell you what, he is just such a remarkable human being. You can't help but get excited about some things that sometimes are hard to get excited about when you get into the weeds of all the different elements that go into branding. But if you don't get excited working with Jared and listening to him, and if you don't just really have some of that passion that he has rub off on you, then check your pulse, because something is wrong. If you'd like to find out more about the work that Jared does, or maybe get in touch with him and see about working with him, we'll put the links in the show notes section on the episodes tab for today's show at privatelabelpodcast.com. But you can also visit jaredangaza.com. That's Jared, Jared, Angaza, Angaza.com.
If you're looking for actionable tips and tricks to get into your own private label business or to take your business to new heights, don't miss an episode of the Private Label Podcast's Listen and Learn. Each Wednesday, we'll tackle a topic to enhance and improve your private label business building skills. Look for new episodes each and every Wednesday and check them all out online, along with video tutorials and downloadable PDFs at privatelabelpodcast.com.